Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
If you could just tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and then perhaps a little bit about what inspired you to write your book, The Power of Teams.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So I'm a deputy head teacher of a Catholic secondary school in Surrey and also a director of education across our trust. I've been in kind of leadership roles for a number of years now in schools and love working in the education sector. And I suppose there was a few things that started pushing me towards teams and high performing teams, and so it was almost like a perfect storm of things. There was I had been on lots and lots of leadership courses in a very short space of time, and I was getting a little bit of leadership fatigue from those very individual-centric courses where they just focus on one person, and just felt like I was kind of getting a bit fed up with that, and I wanted to explore something different. And I'm a big sports fan, so I was just naturally reading books about sports teams and what helped them kind of hinge together. And I just thought, there must be more out there that we can learn about in education from these interesting, quite extreme, and obviously elite sort of sports and other workplaces. And just started reading and researching, and just got the bug, really. And I think finally, I just could see how many education fads have come in and out over the years that demand quite a lot of staff time. Like we've now got to put thousands of hours collectively into this new thing that's the big thing at the moment. And I really wanted to try and contribute towards an improvement area in workplaces that didn't take time and resources out of schools, because I really believe that we already meet in teams, we're all part of teams, and there's just more we can find out about it. So I think it's an area you can invest in, and it doesn't add extra time or extra money, but you get a lot back from it. So that's what took me down the path, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that comes across in your book, because as I was reading it, I was really thinking how much benefit teams could get out from actually having you call them protocols in your book, just sort of certain systems that they could put into place, which would mean that when you do meet, there's hopefully a much reduction in people feeling that it could have been an email, for example. And you talk quite a lot about that. I wonder if I could sort of, as I've read it, I've picked out a few themes that I felt really resonated with me. And if it's okay with you, it'd be quite nice, I think, just to have a bit of a chat about them. And then you can maybe expand on those thoughts and give us some practical tips, because I know that teachers listening will be really keen to think, okay, this is brilliant, but how can I actually put it into action in my context? So if it's all right with you, Sam, I'd like to start off with this concept that you mentioned quite early on of psychological safety. What is that, and why do you think it's such an essential state to underpin effective team dynamics?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that one. I mean, that's right at the start of my book, and in the model I've created, it kind of, like you said, underpins everything. So psychological safety, I'll try and do the really quick version of this, is a concept that wasn't necessarily pioneered by Dr. Amy Edmondson, because the term existed before her work, but she really popularized it. And if I just kind of regale the anecdote briefly that kind of came about for her to discover it, she was a researcher and was called to look at why certain hospital or medical teams were performing well or not well in America. And they rank ordered the effectiveness of all these hospital teams. And what they realised was that the teams that were the most successful at achieving their outcomes, whatever their outcomes were, clearing patients off the desk or whatever, they were reporting the highest number of mistakes. And the lowest performing teams were reporting the lowest number of mistakes, which obviously on the surface confounds logic. So at that point, they asked her to start talking to the teams. And upon interviewing them, she found that the highest performing teams were the ones who owned their mistakes, talked about the mistakes, normalized mistakes as an everyday learning process, and therefore nothing to worry about. Whereas the lowest performing teams reported the lowest number of mistakes because there was a culture of fear and a lack of trust. And obviously they were making more mistakes. They just didn't ever report them into the entirety of the. So anyway, she kind of took that idea and basically said that the best teams are safe to fail. They have an open culture of dialogue, and fundamentally they use this state to create really ambitious aims for their team. And that's where I think sometimes psychological safety gets slightly misconstrued, because it sounds like a really lovely, warm vibe, doesn't it? And I think some people have mistaken psychological safety for like, hey guys, we all just look after each other here, and we don't really need to get much else done if we're being really nice and warm. But actually, she's very clear in her book, The Fearless Organization, that you create the open culture and the safety and the warmth so that you can push each other to be the best you possibly can be. And that's the fundamental part of it. And those teams, there's a huge body of research from across many sectors which shows that those teams outperform teams that are not psychologically safe.
No, it's really interesting because it links what you've just said there to another concept which you discuss in your book, which is radical candor. And I think that's so important, isn't it? Because what Amy Edmonton's saying about this is how you've got these teams who just sorry, losing my train of thought there. Who kind of hide their mistakes, who don't admit to their mistakes, and who really worry about it. But actually what we want is to catch these mistakes early. And in order to do that, you have to be able to have quite direct conversations with people. But so could you say a little bit more about radical candor and what that means?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Radical candor, I kind of I blow hot and cold with this one a bit, because Radical Candor is an awesome book by Kim Scott, where she talks about what we tend to do when we're trying to deliver honest appraisal of ourselves and others in our workplace, and that we fall into certain pitfalls along the way. So for example, we tend to quite a lot of the time be overly empathetic towards people because we're worried about hurting their feelings, and therefore we don't always give them the honest feedback they might be looking for or need. And then on other areas of her kind of quadrant, some people are overly obnoxious with their feedback and very blunt and direct, and the kind of, she calls the sweet spot radical candor, where you look after people, you create safety, but you also give them direct feedback. But I guess the book is almost packaged as like something for the individual to do, and the more I think about it, the more you can't really go around honing your radical candor skills in a team where there's no culture of open feedback and dialogue, because otherwise you sort of stick out like a sore thumb. So I almost think the team has to build a climate of psychological safety and openness before you can start practicing those areas of radical candor.
Yeah, you can't be sitting people down. So I just wanted to meet with you to tell you how dreadful I think you are and how much your lesson was an awful disaster area. But I just mean it because I want to help you. That's not what we want to be doing, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
and what I might just add as well is that in your book, as well as these chapters where you take us through the vision and the underpinning and the theory, and every chapter, I should say, does start with a very clear summary of the research. So it's all very clearly underpinned with evidence. But you also have this wonderful section at the back, which is the FAQs, because you've met with a lot of teachers, haven't you, over the years? And I know that what you've tried to achieve is to kind of give a summary of the kind of advice that you've given to the kinds of questions that people have asked you in practical terms about this. So I just wanted to sort of pull out one of those, if that's okay, from the FAQs, which is the advice that you have for teachers who feel that there isn't a state of psychological safety across their department. Let's say you've just come to a new school and, you know, you've realized that there's a bit of an underculture of blame going on and people are hiding their mistakes and things like that are going on. But you've just read your book and you want to really lead your team in a different direction. How would you advise a teacher under those circumstances to proceed? Because I think we can all imagine that scenario.
Yeah, it's obviously difficult to give amazing advice without the context of the kind of department or school, because some schools have really great coaching cultures where that teacher might have a coach that's not part of their normal department who they can kind of feed stuff back to and kind of chew things through with. So that we certainly have that at my school, so that someone coming in could do that. So firstly, I suppose that step one would be to work out what are the avenues you have to feed things back and to pass on concerns, and is it really clear to you or not? So that could be your coach, it could be your head of department, another line manager, a mentor that you've been given, or whatever. But I think I'm a really big believer in everyone being part of the solution, and I 100% believe in leadership and leaders setting a compelling direction for people to kind of unite behind. But I'm also a big believer in, and you'll know from reading the book, that I think everyone in the team has a role to play in improving the team. So I would very much encourage the said person to try to speak to their head of department and try to contribute to something and talk about ways that they can foster discussion. And I think sometimes leaders sometimes are worried about feedback and participation from their team, because it could deviate from where they think the team is going, or it could cause them more work, or they might think it's undermining their position. But I think if you go to your leader with a kind of, hey, I'd really like us if we could explore this, and I'll run through it with you in advance as the leader, so you kind of know where I'm going to take this conversation, and then ... and you kind of create that kind of safety between both of you, and then you're not just kind of pulling out the rabbit out of the hat mid-meeting with something that's going to surprise the leader, because if they're not already predisposed to this kind of climate, then that's only going to shock them and kind of throw them off guard anyway. So that, I mean, that would be, without any context, that would be one thing that I might recommend.
No, of course, that's really helpful. And I think that's a really important point, actually, because I think there's a lot of a move in education recently for people to look for a silver bullet that you can just like parachute some strategy in. And, we've got this, we're a Sam Coons team school now, we do this. But actually, I think context is so important. And what you offer is a practical guide that a team would need to, or a school would need to sort of take away, digest, sit with, and co-create into their context. Would you agree that that's what you're aiming for?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first kind of 200 and something pages of the book are what I found to be the most kind of high researched areas of teamwork. And then each of those chapters has exactly the same structure. And it was really important to me to include research from other sectors, because I know some could argue that, like, the more domain specific stuff we have, the better. But I've learned so much from reading about other sectors and then trying to assimilate that into my own workplace, that I really wanted there to be lots of stuff from other workplaces and parts of the world. So every chapter starts with some research from other sectors, and then it goes into schools and looks at some schools research, and then finally some more practical guides for school leaders. So I've tried to help kind of broaden people's horizons with some interesting research and anecdotes, and then go turn back down to what's in front of us, which is school teams and school leadership.
And I think that's a really important point, because, for a variety of reasons, we can be in education, we can be a bit nose to the grindstone, because it's very full on, and it's not that people perhaps don't want to expand their horizons, but they feel that they don't have the time or the capacity. And that point that you just made about learning from other industries, I thought was really interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was about a surgeon, and he had a conversation with somebody who was a puppeteer, and you wouldn't think those would have anything in common, but what he said is that after talking to this puppeteer, she was saying, oh yes and no, when I'm going to do some puppetry, I do a good 2-hour workout with my fingers to warm them up. And he was thinking, crikey, I don't do that, and I'm going to do somebody's operation. And he was just saying how much it made him think. So I think it's so valuable, isn't it, to have this cross-pollination of ideas.
Absolutely. And one thing I quote all the time is the Evidence-Based Education School Environment and Leadership Review, which came out in autumn 2022. And what they're finding is that a lot of these other sector ideas on psychological safety and trust towards leadership are now really pervading the education sector. We're building up more, not loads, but more robust research about some of these things in education. So it's definitely proliferating into our sector as well.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you. And I was just thinking, one phrase really resonated with me as I was reading through this section, and it was about the decision-making power of the team leader. Okay, and in one of your sections, I think it was one of the case studies that you include, this lovely phrase I thought was, you've got to develop a flat hierarchy of ideas, even if the leader has the final say. Why do you think that's so important in successful teams?
Yeah, can I just say, first of all, the case studies in this book are way better than my stuff in this book. Honestly, they're so good. I've got so many great people like Scott Fletcher, Doug Lemov, Tom Sherrington, Jade Pierce. But honestly, I would genuinely pay for the book just based on the case studies from other people. Lee Hills is amazing. They were just all fantastic. But yeah, to answer your question, one of the phrases I quote in the book is from Dr. Carl Van Atwell, who wrote The Thinking School. And I've been to his school in Essex, and it's just awesome primary school. And he said to me that day, and I write it in the book, that without autonomy, you leave your brain at home. And when you go into work every day and no one's going to ask you what you think or to contribute any ideas or to share your expertise, after a while, you just stop even bringing ideas to even your own head. You just think, well, no one's ever going to ask me or listen to me. So you stop thinking about anything apart from what you absolutely have to do as part of your core job. And that's always stayed with me. When you give people room to think and to breathe and to contribute and to have the autonomy to do that, they begin constantly thinking, constantly bringing stuff that could be to the benefit of the team or the organization. So, and then go back to your question, if you're going to gather a group of people together to share ideas and to talk about the way that something can move forward, then you have to have that kind of flat hierarchy of everyone is an equal contributor to this discussion. Otherwise, why bother getting those people together? Everyone brings knowledge and experience. So I find it infuriating when I see teams where people don't get to share their ideas, and if they're not very good at that because they haven't got the culture of that, then there are structures and things you can put into meetings to give everyone a voice. But what a terrible waste of everyone's time to come to a meeting room where they're never actually consulted or get to share what they're really good at, what they know something about, what they're passionate about. That's kind of one of the toxic aspects of teams, I think.
Because we want to sort of harness the wisdom of the group, don't we? Which is much greater than the sum of its parts often. So I really like what you say as well. From my own research, I'm sort of looking at CPD and things like that in schools, and I've really come to believe quite strongly that autonomy is facilitated by structure in a way, so that the protocols you suggest do support allowing the space for the quiet voices and the shy people who maybe don't feel confident to contribute, because it puts into place a protocol. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit about the protocols actually, that you refer to, how you might structure these meetings to invite those voices in.
Yeah, well, one of them is a very similar thing that both Andy Buck, another great guy and contributor to the book, and Doug Lemov both write about. Andy Buck calls it Cabrio, and it's just a really simple thing. And you guys listening might have tried this before with your teams, and that's someone comes to the meeting with something they want to discuss. So it could be a challenge, it could be something that's been on their mind they want to improve an area with, and that person doesn't have to be the team leader, but that person is chairing this conversation, and they spend a couple of minutes outlining the thing that they're thinking about, the thing they want some help with. Then everyone in the room gets, like, I don't know, 2 minutes of thinking time to think through, oh yeah, what is that challenge all about, and what would I do, what kind of solutions would I offer? And then after that, everyone gets kind of 1 minute to outline some of their thoughts, but the rule is you're not allowed to interrupt, either to agree or disagree with anyone else's point at that stage of the meeting, and you're not allowed to refer to anyone else's points that have gone before you. So essentially, the person chairing that discussion can hear from all of the different views in the room without any kind of tainted or overlap discussion, and then they could start chairing a more open discussion about it afterwards if they wish. So it's basically putting in place a structure that a healthy team would already do anyway, but it can be really, really useful. And some people have said to me when I've talked about that method, oh, what do you do about the people that really, really don't like contributing in front of the rest of the team? And there's, go and talk to them before the meeting, tell them you're going to bring this up, ask them to think about it in advance, kind of reassure them that their initial thoughts on it are really, really credible and going to be really welcomed by the group. Follow up afterwards and give them a bit of feedback about their contribution in the meeting, and kind of, not everything has to happen in that one meeting. Like, you can, lots of one-to-one conversations before and after the meetings help kind of people feel their place of belonging in that team. So yeah, that's just one kind of structure you could use to facilitate good discussion.
Oh, that's really, really helpful. Thank you. And actually, as you're speaking, it's just reminding me of the kinds of things that we might do in our own classrooms, in our practice, to perhaps do a bit of think, pair, share, or turn and talk, or whatever you choose to call it, and you listen in, and then you invite someone to speak because you've heard they've got a really good idea. And actually, I think we do well to remember that adults aren't so different. We all have moments of unconfidence or whatever it is, and I think actually to scaffold these meetings is a really positive thing to do.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to bring us on to sort of the next little bit, which links to this, of course, is when you're looking at the FAQs in terms of the admin side of the meeting, that you've just described. When you've got people in there who do have a loud voice and do want to say, you mentioned something quite interesting in the book, which is that a person, by doing this protocol, a person might come to realize that even though they assumed everyone would agree with them, it is not the case that everyone agrees with them. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
Well, I guess some people just naturally talk more than others, and some people naturally feel more confident to give their views than others. And in sort of more dysfunctional teams, they will just carry on doing that forevermore, and they might not even be aware that they're a dominant voice in the room, and they might not be aware that other people don't contribute because of their automatic contributions. And so I actually think I don't blame those people who are like that. If anything, it just highlights again the sort of slight dysfunction of that team, where they've been allowed to grandstand so many times, and therefore other people in the room just kind of give up after a while. So I think it's perfectly legitimate for a leader, especially if they're looking to sort of turn the corner with the culture of their team meetings, to talk to that person and say, look, you are such a passionate person and part of this team. I'm so grateful for your contributions all the time, because you always give the very, as much as you can to all of us. But we're trying something else in the team at the moment where we want to bring in as many voices as possible, and we're going to try this and we're going to try this. What do you think about that? Ask them some questions about how they feel about that. And then, give them some feedback afterwards, and just say, look, I can really appreciate that in that last meeting, you listened so well, and you really engaged with people after they'd spoken. And I just really appreciate you doing that. So I think sometimes those people are seen as kind of the enemy, when actually they're probably just a little bit enthusiastic and probably haven't been part of a really healthy kind of team culture before. So I think you can kind of get them back onto the straight and narrow, so you're still utilising their strengths but also bringing other people in as well.
And of course, some people find the silence uncomfortable as well, don't they? So, I mean, we've all been in breakout rooms on online platforms, and sometimes you're sat there and it's just like tumbleweeds. So I think there's a certain group of people who will just fill a silence, aren't there?
Yeah, and all power to them as well. And sometimes that's great. I think I learned to respect the silence when I learned how to coach, and that was really powerful for me, actually, not having to fill the void all the time, and that actually time for quiet and thinking is just as valuable as noise.
No, I agree with you, and perhaps need to have a bit of self-reflection on that point. But I just wondered as well, because when you're thinking about team meetings, as we've been discussing, one of the things you suggest is that, and you slightly alluded to this a moment ago, is that the leader isn't the facilitator, and that actually that's a separate role. Could you explain a little bit about why you suggest that might be something that people might try?
Well, I guess we'll probably come to talk about this later on, but I guess the reason that I think teams work really well is because everyone in the team should be learning all the time and growing all the time. And one way that you learn and you grow is when you take on little bits of responsibility and that sort of thing. So there are loads of ways to do this, but whether you have a rotating chair for your team meetings, whether you constantly have a rota of people that are going to present or feedback on things and therefore they lead that section of the meeting, all of us have to learn and all of us have stuff we don't know about. So I like sitting in a lot of my meetings where I'm, yes, maybe the team leader in name, sitting in amongst everyone else and learning from someone else on the team, share something they've been working on or share some expertise that they've just acquired or whatever. And then that person is facilitating the meeting. They're not me. I'm just one of the team after that, learning with the rest of them. Like even this Friday, my pastoral team, which is about 15 people, we have a rota and people sign up to the rota about what they're going to share, and that starts every single meeting we do. And my head of year 12, she's presenting on a book that she's read recently, which we paid for because we buy books for our team so they can present back and we can all learn together. So I won't be leading that part of the meeting or even maybe the whole meeting. She'll do all of that, and I'm just part of the team learning and asking questions, and I think that fosters a really healthy culture of like, hey, we're all growing together. And when we do come to talk about team processes, I will ultimately kind of help steer the direction and some of the final decisions. But everyone is involved in up to that point really, and some people might facilitate things they're particularly passionate about. So does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think it was something as well to do with, how if you're managing the protocols, then that's your cognitive load, isn't it? And you're taking up your time and your headspace with remembering how the protocols of running the meeting, especially if you're trying this out and you haven't really used it very much before, and actually how a facilitator can release up that cognitive load for the learning as you describe. So yeah, I think it's one of these things. It's not, and I was going to come on to this a bit later, but actually I think it's quite an interesting thing to come on to now. These things are not accidental, are they? And I know that some people perhaps would say, well, I've been going to meetings for years. Why do I need to go to these meetings and be told how to run a meeting? I'm an adult, and all the rest of it. These are natural social behaviours or whatever. And I wonder, why is it, do you think, that we need this pointing out? And I do think that we do.
Yeah, I guess if you've been leading a team and you're comfortable with the people that you lead and work with and that kind of thing, you might fall into the habit potentially of not really planning your meetings in that much depth. And everyone's going to turn up with their cup of tea and we're going to do this and this, and we might get half an hour of decent work done in the hour slot we have, or I might let people go early because we've covered everything, or I might just run through the current to-do list for the team because that's an easy thing to do, isn't it? You don't really need to plan that. if you're the head of English, and I was for a while, and your line manager's giving you a list of dates and jobs, and you might just be like, right, I'll just use that as my team meeting later on. And that's such an easy thing to fall into. So I think, like you said, it's very to plan and run a really good meeting is a very deliberate and actually takes a lot of time. Like I think about planning my team meetings like I would planning a lesson. There's a lot at stake. I want to make sure that everyone engaged, everyone's learning, everyone gets something from being there. There's a good climate, and you can't just rock up to the meeting with a to-do list and enact that. You have to really plan in advance. So it's a very deliberate thing to do, and it's time consuming as well as a leader to make sure your meetings are absolutely rocking. But you have to do that because you want people to turn up to the meetings knowing that good stuff is going to happen and good work is going to be done as a group, and that doesn't happen by accident when you haven't really planned or thought about how you're going to use that time.
So do you think that sort of, obviously we're social animals, do you think that you are honing a natural kind of capacity that we have, or do you think that actually there are things that we do need to learn to do as a skill?
I think we all enjoy going and hanging out with people who are like-minded and who do similar work to us. So I think we're naturally, as you said, sort of social beings. We all want to belong. We all like to be part of something bigger than ourselves. But we're also very, very time pressured, and we come to the meeting with a lot of baggage, i.e., oh, I've got this many essays to mark later on. Oh, I've got to call those two parents. They can be a bit tricky. So you come to the meeting with quite a lot going on in your head. So feeling good about being social with other adults is not enough to make you feel like that's a good use of your time when you're in such a high pressure job. So you want to go to the meeting knowing, oh, the last 3 meetings I've been in here, yeah, we got to hang out, but we also did this, this, and this, and then it translated to this action afterwards, and we get really good stuff done together. So the social element on its own is not enough to convince people that you're a team who does great work. So you have to have the kind of combination of the two.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as I say, I really am quite a firm believer that structure kind of promotes autonomy in some ways. But I just want to address the kind of the to-do list element of all of this, because again, linking to your FAQ section of the book, how would you suggest people do manage the admin? Because there is admin, obviously, that people have to get through. And I was reading a paper a while ago, and it studied a particular school and how they'd run their meetings, and they observed that they had an hour's meeting and they spent the first 45 minutes just doing the admin stuff, and actually they finally got round to something, a debate about something pedagogical, and then everyone had to go home after 10 minutes into that really interesting bit that was the bit that was probably the most valuable. So how do you advise team leaders and team members to stop that admin overwhelming the productive stuff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, admin and logistical things are important because there's lots of things that just have to happen, that have to be done. I guess the first test is this admin complex enough that it needs to be discussed out loud, and therefore warrants meeting time, or is it something that people can digest themselves and understand without any verbal input? So one thing that I do is I send out my team bulletin on a Thursday afternoon, which we agreed as a team we would do for the following Monday. But I meet this particular team. It's the team I was talking about earlier on a Friday morning. When we decided to do that. It's not calendared. We decided to meet up on a Friday morning, so it's kind of voluntary from their point of view. But I include both administrative items and more learning items on the bulletin I send on the day before, and then during the meeting on the Friday, go, right, everyone's read that now. Was there any parts of the admin stuff that you weren't sure about? I need to quickly clarify. And they might go, oh, what was the point in us doing ... And it might be like a 30-second, quick, I respond to their query. But otherwise, I assume, and what they deliver, so it's not just an assumption, I assume that they understand what I've written because I've written it clearly and simply, and then we spend the meeting time doing more discussion-based or learning-based things. So obviously, admin does, to summarise, admin does have a role, and you have to be really clear about what you expect from people. But at the same time, there's no reason that should be the dominant part of your meeting. And I can understand why people slip into that habit, but I think you've got to do everything you can as a leader to make sure it doesn't become the dominant overriding part of your meeting time.
No, that's really interesting and helpful. Thank you. And it kind of links into another part of the book, which is sort of the contracting, and you mentioned there about how you've already kind of had a meeting to plan about how you're going to communicate with each other. So there will be an email prior, there will be a particular way that the meeting is done. How would you advise a teacher who's new to leading a particular team, who wants to kind of get all of that contracting done so everyone agrees how they are going to be communicated with, be it through a prior agenda or little one-to-one check-ins? How would you go about setting that side of things up?
Well, if I'm taking over a new team, then I like to meet everyone beforehand anyway, one to one, and go, right, what's working well in this team? What's not working so well in this team? How would you like to develop? What can I do to support you developing this year? Dot, 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 and kind of basically try and find out an objective lie of the land for that particular team. And that normally unearths a few of those things there. And then say, look, I think the best way for us to all stay up to date with what's going on is if we do this. What do you think? And then create a discussion for that. And it doesn't take very long to ask a group of people how and when they like to be communicated with, and what things they feel like they're lacking at the moment in terms of resources or communication, and how we can address that. And then once you've agreed it as a group and you kind of set that direction, then everyone, and obviously you review it every now and again as well. So I still ask my team if they're happy with the 4:30 bulletin on a Thursday, and if they're happy with the meeting that we all do voluntarily on a Friday. And it's well, I do buy pastries for that meeting, but it's still a resounding yes. But they know that I ask, and therefore I think that means they feel more able to give me feedback along the way, because they know I regularly ask anyway. So I don't think it takes all that long just to establish some of those things and then keep evaluating them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess going back to the earlier point about natural social behaviors, I think it seems when you articulate it, it seems like such a good idea. But I bet we've all been to meetings where we don't feel like that's happened. So I think it's really valuable to make it really explicit so that we can really see how almost these sort of micro behaviors, micro affirmations, and so on are sort of setting the scene for actually building a really productive and effective team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that, if we're going to be productive and effective, we've got to know where we're going. And so I want to just talk to you a little bit about vision. How have you seen, specifically the effective communication of vision, which, is not always something that happens. How have you seen it done really well?
Well, I think firstly, the vision is like one of the the whole sort of foundations of the team, isn't it? Like, where are we now? Where are we going? How do we get there? Otherwise, you kind of you fall into that sort of zombie sleepwalking. I've been in teams in departments before where you just turn up, teach your lessons. I'm secondary, so in June and July you tweak some schemes of work every year and shove some different starters in there, and then you go again the next year, and you're just sort of sleepwalking along because there's no vision to be anything other than just a group of people who teach lessons and tweak schemes of work. So I kind of look back on those days with like kind of utter horror now, to be honest. So yeah, I think firstly the leader has to have some sort of vision for what they want from the team. Of course, I really believe in wondering and asking what the team think that their vision is for themselves and for the group as well, and kind of almost helping to kind of co-create that vision so that everyone has that shared belief and that shared buy-in from the get-go. I think what I've seen over the years is that lots of schools and lots of team leaders are really great at whipping out the vision talk on the inset day in the start of the year, and here's my new brand of PowerPoint, here's our new team motto for this year, this is the vision, and everyone's like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And then like 6 weeks go by and there's no mention of it again, and then 12 weeks go by and no one could even now no one can even recall what it was, even if you ask them. So I think that's what the problem that I see is not so much the lack of vision at the start, it's the fact that the vision doesn't play a part of the lived experience after its initial launch. And then that gain time comes around and the team leader's like, oh, all right, but I think of my next year's motto for my vision for the team again. And it doesn't build on anything. So again, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic there, but that does happen all the time. And when you say, oh, what's your kind of vision for the team this year? What are you guys really like working? What are you really, striving towards? And people go, oh, what was that thing we said at Inset? And that's the kind of reaction that you get quite a lot of the time. So I think good vision is vision that is part of the everyday and it's constantly referred back to and built upon, and not just kind of once a year, twice a year, kind of wheeled out in a presentation.
No, that's really interesting, and I kind of want to follow that up with a question about a sort of explicit and implicit cultural narratives, I guess. And you're talking about making a cultural narrative that's really explicit and really clear and co-created and all that's brilliant. But here's the question: how do you, or what could a leader do to just check that the expectation matches the reality? How do you check whether everything you want to do reflects or is consistent with what's actually going on?
Well, that is a biggie, isn't it?
Sam, I'm going to give you a second before you answer that to consider your thoughts and just interrupt quickly, just to remind you that if you want to get hold of Sam's book, The Power of Teams, and any other John Catt publications, our discount is still available for you. We've had this for a while now, but it's still there for you to make use of, and it is JCTTR2324, and you can use that across the whole range of John Catt publications. So please do go and take a look and pick up Sam's book along the way. I certainly am contemplating my own copy. So if you want to, after the show or during the show while you're listening, there is a tweet at the top of the page, at the top of the space rather, and that will guide you to the website so you can go and have a look for Sam's book and all of the others. Sorry, Catherine, back to you. And Sam, I hope that gave you a moment to have a think about your answer.
You're very welcome. Please, thank you for getting that in there, Lucy. And Sam, sorry, I've thrown you a big, massive question there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I'll start talking, then if I've gone off on a complete tangent, then just tell me to shut up. But I'm not a big I'm not one of those kind of clipboard style leaders that goes around like reacting to outcomes and going, well, that outcome must mean that we're not doing X, Y, Z. I'm not really a big kind of outcome I don't like to react to outcomes. I like to consider and evaluate processes. And I love that phrase from the kind of NFL legendary coach. His book was "The Score Takes Care of Itself," which obviously that can sound a little bit utopian and pie in the sky, but I genuinely believe 90% of that. I mean, this might overlap if we talk about debriefing later on.
Yes.
But that for me, and actually, if someone was to ask me what was the most interesting piece of research I found while I was looking at the research for this book, it was this massive plethora of evidence about teams who debrief and how much more effective they are than teams that don't. And debriefing is like the academic-y kind of word for teams that review and evaluate a lot. And there's a huge body of research from organizations like the military and hospitals and medical teams about how they regularly debrief. And it's so interesting and really cool. And I find that a lot of teams don't necessarily follow some of these really evidence-informed approaches to debriefing. So the teams that tend to perform the best are the teams that have a very normalized culture of reviewing how things are going before an outcome comes along, and they have this sort of knee-jerk reaction, i.e., oh, this is going great, no action needed, or oh, this is going terribly, quick, let's do something and change something. So a few fundamental processes of debriefing to be really, really effective are: one, if you launch something or start something like a new vision, like a new project or initiative, at that point, the launch, you pencil in a few dates where you're going to review the processes, so that when you do have a debriefing discussion as a team, they are pre-planned into the diary, and it's not a response to something that was happening, good or bad.
Mm.
So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you obviously have, hopefully now by this point, curated a lovely culture of psychological safety where there's open dialogue. But this regular debriefing means that the whole team are contributing to your oversight of how things are going. So it's not the leader walking around with a clipboard going, "Well, this is happening here and this is happening here," and probably not getting the full perspective on things.
Yeah.
But you're using debriefing as part of your meeting time to really discuss and understand what's going on in the team. And working alongside that is, I'm a big proponent of regular surveying as well. Little and often surveys to your team every couple of weeks with just a couple of targeted questions about something in particular, and sharing the results with your team in a meeting, in a discussion, for full transparency, so that you can show them that you're, humble enough to both ask for participation and then to showcase it and act on it, and take it on the chin as well. So I can't remember what the question was now, Catherine, but but it all comes back to debriefing.
Yeah, no, it was about how you kind of check in and find out whether or not you've kind of got any sort of assumed or unspoken sort of cultural norms that are just sort of sitting under the surface. And I'll explain just what I mean. So I was reading something, and it basically said people went into a meeting and they had the meeting and then they left, and whatever the CEO had said, they'd sort of turned to each other in the corridor and said, "Oh, well, actually, everybody knows we don't really do that. He's just told us to do this, but we all know it doesn't really work like that." And it's, I guess what you're saying about debriefs is that if you have those planned in, and as you say, pencil them in so they're not reactive, is what you're saying, that kind of helps to unearth those kinds of things, make people comfortable to talk about them, helps you detect them.
Yeah, because it's not just that those tools give you feedback. It's that even by going through that process, you are constantly showing the team that it's cool to give feedback, and you're not going to be wrapped on the wrist for giving your leader feedback. Your leader is asking for feedback regularly, responding to it in a humble and kind of personable way, and then actually acting on it. Because the worst thing, what you just described, is awful, because they just had a post-meeting meeting. They clearly didn't feel like the CEO was someone they could give feedback to, so they just give feedback to each other about it, and that nothing will ever change there. So that team is doomed to perpetual kind of ineffectiveness, because no one's prepared to give the leader the feedback they need. So yes, there are structures like debriefing process and surveys, which will unearth really great data for you. But even better than that, you're basically showing you're the kind of person that wants feedback and will engage with it. And then you're much more likely to get day-to-day on the ground feedback, informally and formally, so you can actually do something with it. I would be, you can't stop people saying things about you, so I'm sure people complain about me all the time, but I'd be mortified if people didn't feel like they could bring something to me that wasn't going well in the team's work. That's like, for me, that's the worst part of team dysfunction.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point that you make about how you sort of, in the book, you talk about how a leader needs to model that kind of behavior so that other people can see how to, almost, it's not to invite a criticism, but it's almost to say, look, I've received a criticism and this is how I dealt with it, and show you taking it on the chin and being constructive with it as a model to others.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the mistake some people make is that they just ask a question and expect people to immediately give them feedback. But the small difference to that can be, right, everybody, recently I've tried to do this, this, and this. I don't think it's really working, and I think I've made a couple of issues with the way I've rolled this out. Can anyone help me and give me some advice on how we could steer this in a better direction? Because immediately you're kind of accepting a bit of culpability, you're being vulnerable about something you tried and it didn't work, you're asking for help and support, and showing that kind of, like I said, vulnerability and humility. So even that will help unearth, I think, more honest discussion from your team than just going, well, this isn't working very well, what should we do? So yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And another thing that you mention is we don't want that descent into blame, do we? How do you guard against that? Because with, you know, whether we like it or not, we are in a very high stakes kind of system. We are dealing with children's futures. We are, you know, subject to Ofsted inspectors, and those kinds of things. So how do you, in a high stakes accountability context, which we have been for a long time in education, how do you prevent or guard against the descent into blame cultures?
I guess hopefully everyone knows this already. So maybe it's not. Maybe when we do blame, it's not a rational, logical thing. But I think everyone knows that blaming people has no impact on the next step. It has no impact on improvement, does it? When you blame someone and make them feel frankly shit about something they've done, that has no impact on future growth. So that there are ways of exploring mistakes or suboptimal bits of work which don't involve blame and certainly don't involve public blame. And I think that's, you know, Amy Edmondson's just written a book literally about failure, called The Right Kind of Wrong, and I'm only like a quarter of the way through it at the moment, because I've just read Middlemarch, which was much longer than I thought it was when I started. So I haven't got very far with The Right Kind of Wrong yet. But she basically talks
It's very
about how
good. I'm reading that as well, actually.
it's brilliant. I mean, it's like how you reframe failure.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be human and say, well, we all fail multiple times a day at different things. So some things are more high stakes than others. But if something does go wrong, then what's going to have the biggest impact on us turning the corner? Well, it's going to be working together to find a solution and looking after each other. Because if something's gone wrong, if someone is responsible individually, they're already going to feel awful about that. So having any kind of blame culture without the kind of prospect of learning and looking after and supporting that person is not going to yield any good results. So I think if you see it going on within your team, you have to kind of call it out, and that might be a one-to-one conversation afterwards with someone. But it also might be going to look after that person who has made a mistake or has done something that wasn't as good as it could have been, and kind of having a chat with them. But I often find, even for that, even when you know you have to deliver the fact that they haven't done something as well as they could have done, I still find adopting more of a coaching approach to that conversation will get good gains, because they're a trained professional adult. It won't take much reflection and kind of coaching for them to understand what's gone wrong and how they can better it next time. And then obviously you center it around what support they would need to grow from this experience and to learn and to do even better next time. So I think there's lots of things we can do, and some of that is public framing for the team about what we do. And the other thing that Amy Edmondson talks about is saying to everybody at the start of a project or a bit of work or an academic year, hey, things will go wrong sometimes in this team, and we will make mistakes in this team. So when that happens, here's what we do and here's what we don't do, because we're a group and we've got each other's backs, and we're going to make sure we get the best out of each other. So when we do have a bad day as a team, here are some do's and here are some don'ts. Like, can we all agree on that now? You know.
Yeah, it's like contracting again, isn't it?
Yes, like contracting. It's just anticipating as well. It's being proactive and anticipating that there are good days and not so good days.
No, that's really great. And it does link, actually, because I want to talk about professional learning in a moment. But before we talk about professional learning, something that's occurred to me as you've been speaking is the other section of the book where you actually give advice to leaders who do have to take someone aside. How do you recommend those kinds of conversations are the most fruitful? And I suspect it's going to be to do with coaching, but I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit, dealing with the difficult person perhaps in your team.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And some of the most fascinating research in the Culture Code, which is a book everyone's probably listening's probably read or heard me talk about before. That's my favorite non-education kind of leadership book, apart from Amy Edmondson's work, is the Culture Code. And in that book, Daniel Cord does quite a lot of research into what is, I mean, it's not a great name, but what they call bad apples. And
Yes.
they look at groups, even in this kind of like training center, they plant a bad apple in loads of different groups. And groups of people that have never met before. And the bad apple is basically instructed by the organizers to do things like, and these are all adults, do things like yawn aloud, look disinterested, put their head on the desk, um, aloud question the purpose of the task they're doing and kind of mock it. And it is incredible the impact that one person has, even on the most motivated group of people. And then other teams, they get good apples planted on their team and they raise their game massively. So it's fascinating the effect that someone who's really positive, and someone who's really negative can have on even the most motivated, intelligent or whatever teams. So we have to deal with people who are maybe not contributing positively to the team's success and culture, because otherwise it will fester, and those teams will lose out in the long term. And what we do is too valuable to allow something like that to carry on. I'm a big believer, as you probably know, of just giving people a chance and giving people a chance to shine and people a chance to talk about. Because ultimately, no one comes to work to do a bad job. I mean, certainly I've met a few bad apples in my day, but I don't think I've ever met someone who actually comes to work to do a bad job. And if they do it, just there's
So not malicious. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's clearly something, if they are a slightly toxic part of the team, then there's something there that's motivating them to behave not in their best self. So I think to give them the best possible chance of turning that around, you've got to first question them and ask them and kind of coach them through how they feel about being part of the team. Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they're being utilised in the right way? Do they understand the vision and the values of the team? Do they agree with them? Would they like some sort of role? And just try and work out what it is that they do or don't like about the current team climate. But at the same
and it
time,
might be that sorry to interrupt, it might be that they've come from being in dysfunctional teams before, and it's just a hangover from that as well.
Yeah, Lee Hill writes about that a bit in the case study in my book, actually, that if you come into a team that have baggage of lots of change or leaders who never listened before or whatever, then some people have their guard up for quite a long time and they don't really want to know and be part of this new thing that you're doing, because you might be gone in a year, or you might be or whatever. So that's how I'd approach it to begin with. But also we have to, like I said earlier, there's a lot at stakes for our teams. The education of children, the well-being and development of adults who are brilliant and needs to be nurtured as well. And ultimately, you have to start holding people to account if they are not taking the chances you're giving them to grow and be a part of the group together. And that has to be direct. And it has to be, again, it's a lot easier if your team has a very, very clear, agreed upon vision and set of values, because you can say things like, look, we've agreed as a team that some of the most important values and behaviors are ... At the moment, sometimes I'm seeing things from you in meetings that kind of are contrary to that. Like, how do you feel about that assessment? And then you can always link back to this very clear narrative about what this team is and how it behaves. And ultimately, then that gives them the decision whether they're going to behave like that or not. And sadly, sometimes you have to move people on if they're not up for that. But I also find that the teams that have and schools that have the clearest narrative about who they are and what they do, when they're super clear about that all the time, that kind of encourages people, oh, I like this, I want to stick around, or you know what, that's not for me. And it's the teams that are a bit waffly and don't really have much of a narrative or a set of visions or values about them. They're the ones that tend to attract kind of those hangers on that don't really want to be there. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of,
yeah. It's about and I know that it's another book that I know you've read and I know that you love, is it's all about the team story and the us story, isn't it? I wonder if you could very briefly say something about creating that and why it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the book you're talking about is Belonging by Owen Eastwood.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And he kind of goes back to the essence of what it means to be human, to our ancestors who were living in these primitive groups without TV or electric or even books, and the only thing they had to bond them together was stories about what made that group unique. And he calls that creating your us story, because people love being a part of something, don't they? We love being part of something that's bigger than just us. We love belonging, we love connection. So that's one of the best ways you can utilize it, energize a team around a message. Is like, right, what's our narrative, what's our story, what makes us unique as a group, like what is unique about us that means we're going to do amazing things together and really benefit the lives of these children in our care. And once you start to pull that out, I mean, it's a difficult message to resist for anybody, even if they're feeling a little bit of friction towards the organization.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting, and I know because I've seen you speak before at conferences, and I know just how passionate you are about this. So that's really brilliant to hear, and it links really nicely onto the thing which I want to move us on to, which is learning. And I loved that chapter about learning came straight after the well-being chapter, because I think that there's research to show that well-being actually is protected and boosted by professional learning, because it can actually almost give us a bit of a barrier between us and the danger of burnout. And I wonder if you've noticed that. Do you think that professional learning boosts people up in a way that those who don't have it perhaps end up feeling a bit more burnt out in their professional lives?
Yeah, immeasurably. I mean, I loved writing this chapter actually because I don't write tons often about school CPD and like teaching and learning and stuff, so it's like a really nice chance to kind of dip into that, and to use Jade Pierce's kind of framework for learning from her book as well, which is really great, by the way. Everyone should read that. Yes, my biggest, one of the things I say when I talk about teams is that all teams do stuff. They have a remit, don't they? Like, your team delivers this, your team teaches this, your team provides this service or whatever, which is great. But for me, every single team in the world, even if you don't want to offend anyone, but like sell paper clips or whatever, even if you're the paperclip seller, every team should view one of their core remits as being learning and growing together as a group. So whether you teach amazing lessons or you make paper clips, that might be your main remit on paper, but your other remit is everyone in the room growing and learning together. I really believe that, and like you said, it was deliberately placed near well-being in the book because I think people feel great when they're learning. And I really love the model of self-determination theory, which looks at people's relatedness and autonomy and competence, and all of those three things link to learning. Like, those are the three primary needs that they identify in self-determination theory: competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And by having a great learning culture or CPD culture or program for your team, you basically tick massively all three of those primary needs that we really, really need to thrive in our workplaces. I could go all day on this one, to be fair, Catherine. I just think, when I love learning. Like,
Yeah.
I think every teacher does. So you want to walk to that meeting with your coffee in your hand, like I said earlier on, feeling like, oh God, I've got to call those parents later on. But this room I'm about to walk into, wow, we learn stuff in this room, and I can't wait to go in there and do that together. And that's, for me, like the real power of a team.
No, yeah, that's really brilliant. Thank you for that answer. I just want to address actually what it is that we're learning, okay? Because I support of really up-to-date CPD and evidence-informed practices and things like that. That just wasn't around when people who are much older than me trained. But there's an awful lot that's come out in research in the last decade that just simply wasn't around for some of our more experienced teachers. And so you've got a room probably with a hugely diverse number of people with different experience, and the inexperienced may be more research informed than the experienced. And I wonder, how would you go about supporting all of that diversity of learning needs in a team?
Yeah, because you're right. If you do the ECF at the moment, you are kind of flooded with research stuff, aren't you? Like that program is heavy,
Yes.
really great, but very dense with research. I think what I've found is that when teams do learning together, it should always hinge around, yeah, so how can we apply this learning that we've just done together into our team processes or our development plan or whatever we're doing as a group, our products, so, as well. And I think the way that you can overcome the potential issue just described is that let's just say someone is really informed about this area of practice. They've presented to the group about this theory, about this bit of research they've just read or understood. And then the discussion turns to, right, so how could we really utilize this in our work, in our processes? And that's when maybe some other people in the team, perhaps as you describe, more experienced, who haven't heard about that piece of research, that thing before, can go, oh, well, actually, this sounds like a lot like this thing I've been doing for ages, but I didn't know there was this. We could try applying it by this and this, and then you create this kind of these little discussion groups where you take something you've learned about some research and you put it into practice, and then it becomes part of what the team does. So I think that's one way to get around it. So it's not becoming like a knowledge show-off session.
Yes.
And again, that's why with my teams I have a rota that everyone signs up to. About every meeting we start with some team shared learning, and there's a rota, and people sign up to what they want to present about, a particular area of interest or knowledge they have that links to our area of work. And then they can make it their own, that thing that they lead, and then they can facilitate the discussion with everybody else. So kind of that seems to work really, really nicely, that format.
I really like the way that you framed that there, actually, because as you were speaking, I was just thinking, well, what happens if we don't frame it so positively, or if we leave these kind of, we don't acknowledge the experience of those experienced colleagues in the room, or whatever. And I've heard, as I've interviewed many teachers over the years, people talk about listening to a talk in CPD, and they come to believe that they are there to facilitate somebody else's promotion or something like that. And there can be a view from experienced colleagues sometimes that, oh, I've seen this, it just was called something else, it's just got a new name now, it's just coming round again, and switch off. And I think what you say there about this co-creation, and I think it's so important, and I think it really sits really strongly beside the debriefs, actually, which is the bit where you say, right, we've learned this, but what do we do with it here? How do we decide if it's effective here? How are we going to make it work in our context? And for me, that's almost where the magic happens, that kind of commitment to structure a team to do the co-creation bit rather than the learning bit. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I tell you where the next bit of magic happens. If you start your meeting by doing some resource or research sharing and discussion, and obviously then you apply it to the team's practice, that's such a great icebreaker for, if you've heard me talk about this before, anybody, sorry, but that's such a great icebreaker for 15 minutes later in the meeting when you might actually be having to discuss quite a difficult topic about your team's work, because you started the meeting with this really passionate, engaged discussion of something a bit detached from your day-to-day work. And then later on, you might have to talk about, right, we do need to talk about now this area of our team's work where, and everyone will have a different emotional investment in that. So starting meeting with knowledge sharing and kind of on a rota like that, it's a really great icebreaker for later on when you actually might have to discuss something closer to home that people have a bit more guarded views about, because they've already practiced it once earlier on in the meeting and it was quite a joyful experience. So it kind of works in lots of different ways.
No, that's really brilliant. Thank you. And I just want to say to our listeners as well, we've got Sam here, we've got another 20 or so minutes, and we've got a couple more things on our list that we were going to discuss. But I do want to welcome anybody who'd like to put a comment in the chat, or, maybe want to ask Sam a question. So if you want to consider doing that, please do so. Before we move on from talking about learning, Sam, I wonder if you talk about something called team learning as opposed to individual learning. And I wonder if you can tell us briefly what makes that so important as opposed to our personal learning.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think that obviously we've all got individual stuff we want to learn, but equally, a team that is thinking carefully about its kind of current state of play will evaluate, hey, as a team, what's the knowledge and the expertise required to do a really good job? Like, what do we need to know as a group to really, really excel as a team? Okay, of those areas, which are our weaker areas? Where do we have gaps? Where do we want to grow and excel more in our knowledge and expertise of that thing? And then you start kind of codifying and auditing. Right, this is what we know. This is what we want to know. This is what we need to know. And then you could almost divide up as a group. Right, okay. Let's say for the next 3 months, we'll use 1/3 of our meeting time for these 3 groups within our team to each explore one area of that learning that we've said we want as a group. And they have this kind of, autonomous CPD project where they go away and research that area and bring it back to the group or whatever. So it's about making learning shared and understanding what's going to improve this team, not just the individuals, but what's going to improve this team through the lens of knowledge and expertise and enhancement. So there's one thing that I kind of made up for the book, which was I called KRGs, which is like knowledge review grids, where teams can kind of like assess what they know, what they want to know, what they need to know, and then think about actions that come from that. But yeah, I just think that's when you create the energy, the shared energy, where teams are learning stuff together. I mean, even recently, like I did a few AQA courses with a fellow English A-level teacher that I share a class with. And we just had a whale of a time learning stuff together. And then we had to, over a couple of weeks of department time, prepare feedback to the other A-level English lit teachers. And I could have done that on my own, and I would have learned, some stuff. But I learned more and was way more engaged by learning with someone else, and we bounced ideas off each other. And yeah, so I just think those little team learning projects that contribute to something the team's mapped out in advance they want or need to know, just really, really powerful.
No, that's really brilliant. Thank you. But of course, at the helm of all this, we've got the leader, the person who's leading the team. And you've got some really interesting things to say about leadership, particularly what it isn't, okay? Because you do talk about sort of myths and the kind of idea of the hero leader, or that you have to have a particular innate personality trait in order to be an effective leader. Would you mind exploring your views on the kind of the unhealthy leadership myths with us?
Yeah, this is an area that I'm sure loads of people would disagree with me on, so fair enough. I just think that, and this comes back to sitting in leadership course after leadership course, where I had to tick my leadership style or my leadership preferences, or I mean, I just have no. I mean, again, sorry to talk out of turn for anyone that disagrees. I have no time for that whatsoever. Like, I don't think there's a particular set of like traits or personality styles that leaders, should have or could have or anything like that. I think leadership is like trying to understand your craft as well as you can and constantly keep improving understanding your craft, because you've got to be really, really great at what you do. But it's also about understanding how teams work and bringing people with you on that process. So yeah, I'm not a massive fan of like this kind of cult of personality style of leadership where the leader has XYZ traits and that's what makes them successful. I think it's way more human and collaborative than that. And I absolutely do think leaders should set compelling direction. Is the word that J. Richard Hackman, the team's researcher, calls it. Set compelling direction for the team. But the team leader is just one person, and there's a big group of people who are really, really willing to work their socks off to contribute to the team, and that's the bit we need to get right. How do we gel people together to work really, really well as a group? And obviously, I'm not dismissing, all leadership principles. I'm not that silly, but yeah, there was just a point in my career. I was like, if I have to fill out another leadership style survey, I'm going to scream and I'm going to run out the room. And I'm going to quit this course right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. I mean, do you think leadership needs a makeover in general?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah, I don't know about that really. I think leadership courses need a makeover. That's one of my takeaways, to be honest. I think leadership courses need a bit of a makeover. So yeah, that's definitely something. I mean, even recently, someone emailed me and asked me if I could come and work with their team. They're an accountancy firm, because they'd heard about my work and they'd just been emailed a flyer from a CPD expert from the accountancy sector, and what they'd offered them over this 2-day course. And I was looking at it and thinking there was like a whole half day on personality styles, and then link that to leadership. And I was just thinking, well, it's interesting to do a personality test and find out what your personality might be, but why should that take up 25% of a leadership course, and how is that going to benefit the people in their actual work? And I think that's why I sound a little bit flippant and annoyed about it, is that if I ever provide training or CPD for someone, I want it to have an instant impact on something they can do in their job. And I'm not convinced that kind of theoretical stuff about leadership style or personality style will have an innate impact on their work the very next day. So that's probably why I sound a little bit nonchalant about the whole thing.
No, I mean, and that's so interesting, because I think that there's been an awful lot of that about, hasn't there? And I do think we do need to look at this with fresh eyes, and we do need to be taking some of these. I mean, I've held a view about education for a long time, that the whole thing just needs picking up and being given a good shake. Do you know what I mean? Because I think there's so many things which are embedded and would really benefit from a fresh look and that co-creation. And just on that, while I think of it, I'd just like to remind listeners that we are very happy and lucky to be sponsored by John Catt, and there's so many wonderful CPD books out there that you could read and take back to your teams and share and have a brilliant time with, co-creating that application for the knowledge that you're going to use in your context. And if you did want to go have a look at the bookshop, we have a code at the moment which you can get a discount with, and that's JCTTR 2324. That's JCTTR 2324 for John Catt Bookshop. And please have a look and enhance your CPD with those readings.
Catherine, can I just say as well, like, just to kind of contextualize that, I can see one of the listeners is Chris Baker, who's awesome, and Chris helps co-chair the Trust Leaders Forum with Tracy Goodyear and Sam Gibbs, and that is essentially leadership CPD that they provide, but they don't call it that. They don't call it leadership CPD. But they provide very specific reflections and input about how you can lead things in your trust really well. So it's a very specific approach to leadership, and that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's essentially like a leadership platform for sharing, but they don't start every course with these very, very, very generic what's a great leader stuff. They kind of go straight in at how can we lead our teams well in trust in this context. And so yeah, that's just one example. Sorry,
that's a brilliant shout. Thank you. And we've got 12 minutes left. As I say, if anybody does want to chip in, please do put a note in the comments or ask Sam a question. That'd be really brilliant to hear from people.
Catherine, you've got Paul in the wings, who I think wants to chip in.
Fabulous.
I don't know what piqued his interest, but he's there and ready and waiting for you.
Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? Good to hear from you.
Yeah, very good. Good to speak to you again. I thought tonight's show has been really good. It's been interesting and pulled in a few memories for me, because I've actually worked in a few schools where I've had different types of leaders and different types of teams as well. And what I was going to say was that it absolutely depends on how the leader goes across to their team, but also there's a bit of luck in it as well, especially if you're new going into a school. It's finding those people who are going to be on your side, who are the most influential in the school to begin with, because we know every school's got like the bigger characters, and they're usually the ones whose voices are heard more. So I found that teachers who go in and find those people and get them on board, that normally helps them. But I've also seen it switch really quickly as well, particularly if a head teacher's got a particular team that he wants to bring in and have it a particular way. And even if it's just one person who then ends up leaving or going to a new place, it can absolutely change. I think you were saying this before. It can absolutely change the mood in a school and how everyone thinks as well. And then what I've seen is that if that does happen and we go from a kind of dictatorial kind of role that a head teacher has, and everyone's kind of told to do this, that, or the other, and then another head teacher comes in and it's completely different, sometimes that can be a breath of fresh air and people can get on board with their ideas.
That's such a good point, Paul. Sorry, hi, by the way, thanks for listening. Yeah, I remember when I first became head of English, I mean, I did not know what I was doing at all. I knew nothing about how to kind of, lead a team. And my line, there was basically in the team of 8, there was probably about 3 people out of the 8 who were kind of on board and wanted to pull in the right direction. And my line manager at the time said, right, those 2 or 3 people are really natural allies for you, and when you're bringing up changes you want to make in the team that you think would be really good for the team, go and approach them before the meeting and get their views in advance, and then they can kind of support you with that along the way. And not only was that a good tactic initially, but once we had a bit more of a group consensus, the other people who were initially a bit more disengaged kind of just got on board because they could see there was some unity in the group for after a long time of not having any, and it was easier just to kind of conform to that and be part of this team that we were building. So yeah, really agree with that, kind of looking out for your allies and trying to foster that to really understand what's going on and getting a bit of an insight to begin with.
Yeah, and I've actually got a situation which is a bit sticky at the moment, to be honest, because I joined at the school I joined 2.5 years ago, and it was there was like 3 of us who were on sort of supply contracts for the year, and then there were 3 of us going for 2 jobs and for a permanent, and so that it was awkward and difficult. And then after 1 or 2 people have sort of moved on and sort of roles have shifted a little bit, everything's kind of calmed down a little bit, but I found myself sort of in the middle of sort of a dispute and kind of a possibility of things returning to what it used to be like, because I've got a TA who is a one-to-one with an autistic child, and also in my class I've got a one-to-one with someone who's got violent tendencies because of trauma in the past. And we are only a small school, and the space that we have is very limited. So we actually have a situation where I've got both of these one-to-ones battling for this one room in school, and they don't get on, and the children don't get on. And because they're both in my class, I'm not being asked to deal with it, but I'm being asked to sort of assist in dealing with it. It could be really awkward, really, how I approach it. And to be fair, I'm not exactly sure how to approach it.
Sam, I wonder, in this situation where people, I think, as Paul's describing, someone almost, some people are made leaders and some have leadership thrust upon them, I think, is to paraphrase Shakespeare there. What would you advise to people who find themselves taking a de facto leadership position, perhaps?
Yeah, it's interesting just listening to Paul's situation there. I think for me, it's always about minimizing the occasions where those things happen without warning, and to sit down in a rational, cold light of day together before the issue has cropped up and go, right, how are we going to rotor this or do something to make sure we don't run into each other midday, trying to arrange something in advance. It's always proactive, always looking forward and go, right, let's say, for example, something does go wrong one day, we both clash in this room, what would we do next? And kind of almost map out potential scenarios from there. And yeah, to answer your question as well, Catherine, guys, that one's probably too long for what we've got time we've got left. But I would love to talk about that more.
Write another book, Sam. Write another book just about that.
Yeah, actually, Chris is going to help me write a trust book at some point.
No, I mean we are very nearly out of time, and it's been so absolutely fascinating. And I know that it says Mr. D Lester, I think that's Darren, is it? And you've said something about looking at other industries and other industry behaviours, and I know that we've talked briefly about that. But I just want to sort of finish off with a scenario. Okay, let's suppose you're a teacher who's going for an interview to step up into a leadership role, and you hold a belief that change takes time. Yes, you set your vision out early. Yes, you get to know your teams. And if they're saying, look, we need someone to come in and make some tough calls and deal with some subpar teaching very quickly, are you tough enough to do it? We want rapid changes, but you very much believe in a more constructive and collaborative approach. How does somebody trying to break into a leadership role more formally kind of get around that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a difficult thing to voice if you were junior to these people saying that, but actually, you can't. They're sort of really stitching you up as a bit of a scapegoat there, because they're essentially saying, "Hey, we're going to put you in this leadership position. You can get rid of loads of people and deal with the fallout." Because how much is anyone going to trust a brand new leader that gets promoted and immediately has to do some really, getting their hands dirty things before they've had a chance to set out their stall and create a good culture? I think it speaks quite poorly of those leaders that have asked that person to do that. They should be doing that now and helping to create future success for the next team leader, rather than putting it all on their shoulders. So I'd be very wary of taking up a leadership position with a leadership team above me saying things like that to me, unless they were saying, look, we're going to work with you to help sort out a few difficult situations, but we also want you to have time to create the culture you need, because this team currently doesn't have that. But alarm bells would be ringing for me if someone gave me that as my main objective coming into the team. I'd be thinking, right, this doesn't sound like a very long-term plan for growth.
Yeah.
A short-term blitz, and it'll destroy trust in me as the new team leader at the same time. So,
Red
I'd be
flags.
red flags about their integrity and also their capacity to get the job done themselves if they're asking you to do that as the immediate new leader of a team.
Yeah, no, I'm making a gross oversimplification or a characterization of that, but yeah, I just wanted to hear your views on that. And we've had a question in the chat from Hannah. Hi, Hannah. You said that there's a lot of similarities, Sam, to the leadership that you've experienced in schools and sports team. Hannah has asked, which teams do you most admire, and how it's led, and which do you think has the most to offer on the educational leadership front, if that's different at all?
Yeah, sports leadership is actually quite difficult to translate to R1, because, and I've been to work with the UEFA Pro license a couple of times now. So like if you want to be a manager in the Premier League, football manager, you do your UEFA C license, B license, A license, Pro license, and it's a really rigorous entrance program to get onto the Pro license. But that's the badge you need to. So I've worked with them a couple of times at St George's Park. And it's really fascinating. I mean, one thing that they've actually nailed in England, like when you go to the England headquarters, is they've actually worked with Owen Eastwood, who I quoted earlier on. They've got these amazing murals going down this long corridor, who we are, it's our vision, it's our values, and they've got the youth teams, the men's team, the women's team. They've got everybody along this corridor, and you can really feel a sense of purpose. So I think what they're quite good at is obviously they've got a lot of money, but they're quite good at creating narratives and stories. I find elite teams like really compelling narratives about who they are and what they're doing. One thing I found about sports teams that they're less good at is they're still a little bit behind us when it comes to things like debriefing and evaluation. There's still quite a lot of that kind of blame culture, sort of kind of stuff that's going on. And so individual teams, it's hard to pinpoint. individual teams. But I always talk about, again, in the culture code, there's quite a lot of anecdotes in there about sports teams, through from basketball and the NFL as well, and they each have their own kind of strengths and weaknesses. But I think genuinely sports teams are great at that identity and narrative, and they do what I think is important. It's not the be all and end all, but they're really great at creating a strong visual presence for that. You know, they hire the best graphics people, and I'm a really big believer. Actually, probably spend more money at school than I should do on like making things look good, because I think if you've invested a lot of time into creating a narrative and a vision, you want it to be so visually kind of compelling that it draws people in to keep seeking out and understanding that even more. So sports teams tend to be quite good at that, but not always so good at the people management and evaluation style, which can still be quite blame culture sort of.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And we have come to the end of our show tonight. And thank you so much to Sam. It's been absolutely fascinating. I know that you could talk about this all day and all night. And please do come back and talk to us again, because it's absolutely brilliant. That is The Power of Teams by Sam Crome, How to Create and Lead Thriving School Teams, published by John Catt. And just to shout out that if you did want to get the discount that we have by them very brilliantly sponsoring us, the code for that is JCTTR2324. That's JCTTR2324. And it's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. Please do visit teacherstalkradio.org to download all kinds of other subjects, fascinating teaching discussions from the website. And please do join us again. And thanks again, Sam. You've been brilliant.
Thanks, Catherine. And if anyone doesn't fancy buying the book, just ping me a message on Twitter and we can just chat there. You don't have to buy the book to have a conversation. So, yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. And thanks, Catherine, for all the research you did on the interview as well. It was amazing.
No, thank you. It's been really brilliant. I hope to see you again very soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Take care.
Take care. Yeah, bye-bye.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.